thank you. This is the July 12th, 2022 City of Rollingwood Utility Commission meeting. We'll begin with a roll call.
Chris Kirksey.
Jonathan Miller.
Sam Attell.
Elizabeth Ray.
And Clark, you're on mute.
Yes, Clark Wilson here.
Thank you. Moving on to public comments. Didn't see any, but I'll pause for a moment. All right. Moving on to the consent agenda. The first item there, only item, is discussion of possible action on the minutes from the Tuesday, June 7th, 2022 Utility Commission meeting. The minutes for that meeting were included in the packet. Do we have a motion to adopt or approve those minutes?
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. The ayes have it. Moving on to the regular agenda item. The first one is a presentation and discussion regarding the 2021 Consumer Confidence Report. This was added to the agenda following some discussion that we had at the last meeting, and I think we had asked about having some additional information.
Yes, I'll just introduce real quick. We have Andrew Hunt with Crossroads Utility Services on the line here, and he's going to be discussing the report and answering hopefully any questions you guys have. So, Andrew, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes,
Got
thank
it
you.
unmuted here. Awesome. Okay, so in front of you, hopefully you have it, is our annual Consumer Confidence Report, also called the Water Quality Report for the City of Rollingwood. This is a required report from EPA as well as the TCEQ, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, for us to send out to your users, to your residents, with all of the parameters of constituents that we sample in the water, as well as Austin, the city of Austin, what they sample. And so it's several pages long. You'll see a lot of boilerplate language that the TCQ requires us to put in this report on the first 2 pages. Beginning on page 3, you will start seeing all of the contaminants that are measured and sampled, and those are broken out into different categories. Inorganic on page 3, organic contaminants, VOCs, volatile organic contaminants, and then we get into our chlorine, so the levels of chlorine, which is about midway on page 3, into the disinfection byproducts, and then on page 4, lead and copper, turbidity, and basically the very last page has everything else that's not regulated that we sample or City of Austin sample. So we compile this report with the help of the City of Austin. They send us every year, they're required by March 31st to send us all of the results from their system. Since you're a purchased water system, you don't treat the water. You simply buy it from the city. So a lot of these are actually from the city. They're not parameters or constituents or contaminants that we sampled ourselves, and in many cases we end up putting COA under the little year there to help us and others understand that that's a City of Austin level that they recorded that they're required to give us. So in lieu of going through each of these, I'll open it up. The main thing I would focus on, I know you can read these and see asbestos and cyanide and simazine and things like that, and Google them, and it can get a little scary. But there are trace amounts. What we're talking about, parts per billion, which is really small, of these contaminants in your water. The main thing to look at are your disinfection byproducts on page 3, which you'll see the total haloacidic acids and total trihalmethanes are low in comparison with the limit. So that's good. When you see those high, that means water is a little bit dirtier and a little bit more contaminated, and the potential there for those are sort of your cancer-causing agents over time. So City of Austin's water's good. We haven't really had any issues with it over the years, but we'll attempt to try to answer any questions that y'all have or maybe your residents have if they read this.
So, Elizabeth, you like
I
that?
do. I have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
So I was looking at the copper, and we're still using the 2019 sample because I guess that gets tested every 3 years. From what I can look at, if I look at past reports.
Yes. Sorry, I broke up a little bit. Did you say lead and copper?
Yeah. Well, starting with copper, lead and copper, I guess.
Yes.
I've looked; they get tested every 3
Yes.
years. I don't know what our actual level shows, but it says 0.2 from the 2019 sample, but in the 2018 sample, it was 0.004. So from 2018 to 2019, there was a 500% increase. And I don't, I'm concerned because we have our aging pipes. So this is the water sample that comes from the City of Austin, but the water sample that comes from ours, I'd love to find out kind of where we are on that and wonder if we should be looking more than every 3 years since we had a 500% increase in 1 year 3 years ago.
Yeah. Great question. Copper can be a little difficult. Both lead and copper are unique contaminants because the way we sample those, the state requires us to sample those, is we have to use homeowners, and we have to ask homeowners to follow a prescription, a way of sampling, because they take the sample specifically for lead and copper from their kitchen tap if they're an approved site. So 2019, which looks like we're gonna start here soon for 2022, but we go around, we have actual sites that the state has approved. We hand a bottle to the resident. The resident is supposed to follow the correct method and take that sample. And so I would not be concerned really with the levels increasing per se, because I actually have your longer history in front of me. And 2009, your levels were higher than they were in 2019. Not much, but enough to kind of, I think the point being that it depends on the technique, probably of that sample in 2012 was lower. 2016, when that round happened, it was really low. And then 2019, it increased a little bit. So the main thing we try to recommend is to look at it over several years. And since you are well below the action level of 1.3, I would not be concerned really at all. And I think it can be somewhat, I guess, confusing as well, because that may not represent, your whole system. If one house has bad plumbing, inferior copper, or electrolysis is another thing, so their house is not grounded properly, they can leach copper at a much higher level into the water system than the house next door. So that's why they ask for the 90th percentile and not just what's your highest, because they realize, TCEQ realizes there are anomalies out there with people's systems, and we usually look at that 90th percentile. But, if you're a 1.0, I'm trying to think of the water system we've operated before. Oh, Green Shores, over there, Ski Shores, is a little water system. We had extremely high levels in 2 homes, and we were very concerned, so we kind of went around and looked, and both of them had aggressive water is the technical term, meaning they have water systems in the homes, they have water softeners, and they were essentially stripping the copper right out of their pipes. And so we could get with them and kind of help them, fix that issue. But I wouldn't be concerned. I would be concerned if all of the sites were that high, but .02 is fantastic. I mean, that's great. And then last round we did the sampling in 2017 or 2016, it was almost non-detect.
Well,
So,
I have a few more questions on that, because the 2016 sample, I believe, was invalid because we were actually, if we look down into it, we were fined because we weren't sampling properly for like 7 months of 2016. And so that's kind of an anomaly one. But I looked up on the TCEQ administrative site, and it says that that the MCLG should be 1.0, not 1.3. So that was one curious thing. But it also says that any action should be taken if your sample is over .015, which ours is. So I'm trying to understand the information from the state versus the information from the City of Austin, and then what our actual
Sure.
readings may be, since they have changed.
yeah, I mean, were you looking at the Drinking Water Watch website of the TCQ?
No, I was looking at the actual administrative code. The Texas
Yeah,
Administrative Code for the Environmental Quality, the Commission
What
of Environmental Quality.
What I would be happy to do, I can send this to Ashley. So what the TCQ has a website that they maintain that records every sample that water systems take. It's called Drinking Water Watch, DWW. If you Google DWW TCQ, and then you type in your water system and then click on chemical results by name, you can see all the stuff we've sampled. It will give you the history all the way back to, let's see here, 2003 is the latest it goes. And so through the rounds of sampling, I've never seen that the water, really in any of these results, exceed the MCL, so maximum contaminant level. Now the MCLG, the maximum contaminant goal, is not the sort of the level that would trigger any kind of TCQ review. If you exceed 1.3 MGL or parts per million, then for sure you'll need to do additional sampling, a corrosion control study, and we've had water systems have to do that based on literally one bad sample. But looking at your history going back all the way to 2003, I don't really see y'all really close to that at all. Whether 2016 was a good round or not, 2012 looks fantastic. 2009 looks fine. Really, TCQ is looking at 1.3. Anything that exceeds that is time to step in and look at copper.
Okay, thank you. Because the reason I'm asking some of these questions is not just for the water report, but as we go through separately, our exploration of the city system and some of the reparations that may be done. I just wondered how this may dovetail into that, to helping us further identify the areas that are in the need of most support, rather than just where we've had a lot of low pressure or water breaks or so forth or so on. And I didn't know if it would be an idea that we expanded the number of homes that we sampled to make sure that we include a home in the different areas that we've already identified as the most potential issue.
Yeah, and so we will be doing this later it's usually third quarter as when we go around, but I think it would be good for us to put out some information to residents. If they're interested in signing up as a site, we can qualify them. I think you only need 10 based on your size, but it's always great to have new sites. TCQ is always looking for representative sites, so not just like one side of the neighborhood, but kind of throughout the water system for these sites. And so we're happy to do it, because most people do not want to participate in this kind of stuff, because it does require some coordination and getting them a bottle and then giving them instructions, and then a lot of people are just they don't want to mess with it. But when we do go around this later this year, we can definitely put something out through staff. We need sites. If you're interested, let us know, because it's not only copper, but it's lead, and I feel like lead is definitely a trigger constituent that a lot of people are concerned about. So we're happy to add sites.
So, yeah, I was going to go there next, and I have like 4 or 5 different areas. The next one I was going to go to, and thank you for that answer. I think that would be really helpful. The lead, so the 2021 report says that we're using the 2019 test, but the levels weren't reported in the 2019 water quality report. So I looked at the 2021 level, which says it's 0.001, but the last number on any of the Rollingwood reports is a test from 2016 that showed it was 2.3. So that is curious how we could have gotten so much better with our known aging pipes, and I wondered again where those tests may actually be occurring, or are we just taking that lead number from the city of Austin?
Yeah, so let me go here back to 2015. I'm sorry, I'm not following. Where are you seeing 2015 numbers?
So, no, 2016. So the 2021
2016.
says that it's from the 2019 test, but I looked at the 2019 consumer confidence report and lead was not on it. So I started going back through them to see when the last one would have been, and that would have been 2016. And in 2016, it showed that the lead level was 2.3, and it just was a little confusing to think that we went from 2.3 in 2016 to 0.001 now.
Yeah, so that could be what that could be is actually the way that so you can record that would be 2.3 parts per billion. If I translated that, you would have recorded this year 1.0 parts per billion for 2019. So when you see that little less than 0.001, that is because they didn't really find it. They didn't really have a detection of it. So 0.001 parts per billion is the lab's like minimum microscope is the way my Aggie brain works. So it's less than what they can detect, but they have to record it. So that's why you see that less than. But you're right. In 2016, you had a 0.0023 MGL, which is higher than the 0.001 MGL that you got in 2019. So I think it's possible just either with the sample site or just the strength of the sample why you would have a detection like that. But again, I think if you see this, if I can send you this website, you'll see like in 2009, you didn't have any detect either. 2006, you had a couple that were 4 parts per trillion, and then 1.5 parts per billion. So it's still there, just in very, very trace amounts. So we would translate that in our world that you don't have a problem with lead.
Well, I guess just with the fluctuation and whatnot, I guess that speaks to maybe it being wise to have multiple sites that we're testing, given that we know that we have some issue with our pipes. So I guess that sort of underscores the thought that came out of the copper discussion, just to, be on the safe side.
Yeah, and so I'll just kind of say real quickly too. So ECQ and either the EPA is revising the lead and copper rule, called the LCRR. They're big into acronyms. They are revising that. They've already passed it in December 2021. EPA has, and it is getting more stringent, meaning that if utilities hit certain trigger levels, certain MCLG levels, that they'll be required to start mitigation of copper or lead prior to exceeding the MCL, or the maximum contaminant level. So the other scary thing that they're going to implement, which they've been trialing in Flint, Michigan, as well as Denver, Colorado, is requiring utilities, public water systems like the city of Rollingwood, to survey their utilities. So this is sort of hasn't been settled yet on the TCQ side, but it looks like it will require us to prove the pipe material of not only the main, but the customer's line. And so we'll have to certify that and say that we don't have lead lines anywhere in our system, and it's caused quite a bit of concern among water system officials and utilities because we don't really go in the home, right? We're not really obligated to go in the home and prove water heaters and stuff inside the house it does not contain lead. But this new rule could go that far. So TCQ has not adopted anything yet. They're still in their review process, but it's very concerning. There's a lot of meetings and things happening on the water side, water system side, where we're trying to get some clarification because it could be very expensive to have to go out and not only sort of dig up mains to certify, yes, this is PVC or this is, copper, but actually go and bore, a hole in somebody's yard and find their line and say they're not lead, and we certify that and do that for every connection. So it's a little wild. It's one of the scariest things we've seen in a while, just at the length it's going to require the city to comply.
Well, let me ask you a question. Where do the city of Austin's samples come from? Because presumably that's from a central water supply and not from customers' homes, since we're taking water from a central supply from them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they are you talking about lead and copper?
Yeah.
Or just in general?
They had a sample that was 15. And it's in their report.
We had
No, the city of Austin did.
Ye-
So 90%.
Yeah,
of
so that
samples
and
were
that's the
below, and
unfortunate
then one
thing is
sample was
they're a singular water system. So they could take a sample in, East Austin or out on the lake, and that is recorded against their public water system. And regardless of if you actually drink that water, they're required to report that to us. And so that can be a little deceptive. The copper and lead in this report are definitely samples that we took, but some of the samples that you see that are labeled COA, like for example, on the page 4, all of those secondary constituents, aluminum, I have no idea. I mean, they're not required to tell us where they sampled aluminum, if they sampled it, 100 yards from Rollingwood or way on the other side of town. And that can be kind of deceiving at times.
Okay. It's interesting because if we're looking at their report, it's not really a report on the water that we're getting from them. It's a report from their system. So,
Well, so they hand us a report which just lists, here's what we sampled. And for secondary, for example, on page 4, they're not required to send us any of that. And some water systems, smaller water systems, do not send anything like this at all because they're not required to. But essentially, whatever they produce on that report, we are required to then take and put in our report, even if we're, don't even know if it's actually, like if it's from water treatment plant 4, for example, like you are not drinking water from that plant. But since it's a singular water system, we have to record it that way. So we've tried in this report to distinguish that.
yeah.
We're not really allowed to say, hey, that's City of Austin stuff, don't worry about it. So we try to distinguish, like chloramines, for example. That's very important. That's chloramines that disinfects the water. That's what we record constantly. That's in this report. But other, VOCs, for example, vinyl chloride is very common, diquat and cymazine. So those are fertilizers and herbicide runoffs. I don't know where those samples were taken. It's very common for those to be in the water system. In fact, I see that in most water systems now, just with everybody pulling from the same lakes, and a lot of times. But again, that could be, on the other side of Austin where they sampled that.
Right. Well, so to that end, one of those that's on the page 4, that's not City of Austin, so I assume that's our measurement, is the pH. And I found that curious because, first of all, the measurement is from 2012, so it was 10 years ago. And at the time, it said the limit is 7, but our average level was 9.25. So have we looked at our pH in the last 10 years? The last time we reported it, we were over the limit?
So, I mean, no, it's not something that we're required to sample as a water system. It's a secondary constituent. It does have an effect. It has an effect on, sensitive individuals. And if you have a home treatment system, for example, some of your companies will ask, what is the pH? And then they can make settings in the water softener or whatever. But I think that was probably the last time Austin or the city recorded. I can look on here really quick, see if I have any more recent, but I don't think so.
Corrosive, which would be, a little worrisome with some of our aging pipes.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, it's something that we can sample in the field with a pH monitor and record, and it does look a little basic on the basic side of things. You want to see it, 7.5 or 8, but there could be a number of reasons, time of year that it was that high. Or y'all are just selling some, fancy alkaline water. Everybody don't need to buy it anymore. You just drink it,
Or maybe we could just put it on our agenda to find out what it is, since it's a 10-year-old measurement.
Yeah, it's not an issue. We can definitely do that.
Okay, and then I was a little confused about the nitrates, because on the 2021 report, there are two different, well, there's 3, but I think one's a duplicate. There's 2 different nitrate measurements.
Right. Yeah. So one's kind of a compound measurement. The main one is nitrates. Is it what we're monitoring with your nitrification action plan? So that's a required thing that we monitor for your water system. That basically gives us information about your water age, and if you are creating biofilm in the water system, which is kind of the nitrification of water when it doesn't turn over in the chloramines, which is really prevalent in chloramine systems, which is most systems that use chloramines instead of free chlorine. It over time, increased levels of nitrate will produce biofilm. So that's that kind of nasty stuff that grows on the inside lining of the pipes. And you start seeing that with issues with maintaining chlorine in the system. And so TCEQ requires water systems to manage this and monitor it with a nitrification action plan. So we take regular samples every quarter at your entry point, a midpoint in the system, and at the end of the system. And what we want to see is nitrates that are not increasing throughout the system. So at the end of the system, which is kind of the concern, we don't want to see those levels high over time. That means chlorine is not being efficiently utilized. You're growing, this biofilm, and you may need to do a burnout, what's called a burnout, which is essentially like a pool. You shock it. So there are different ways to record that, and that's why you see that recorded differently. But nitrates are really what we monitor and what we watch for. And actually, over time, I'm looking at your DWW website again. You've actually cut them in half since 2016. Prior to that, 2011, they were low. Then they got up in 2016 to 0.3, mgls, and then most recently we're in the 0.15, 0.16. So it's very uniform. All of our samples in 2022 were 0.15, 0.16, 0.16, like they're very, very constant. So that's good. You're not seeing that increase, which is a sign maybe that the water's dirty or we're having trouble treating it. And it's kind of a, nitrates in themselves are not, they do have MCLs, but they're mainly managed, or they're sort of indicator type constituents that may show a bigger problem with either TTHMs, trialmethanes, or your chlorine is not being effectively utilized. You're losing chlorine by the end of the system, and then you have taste and odor complaints, or issues with bacteriological samples, which we take, which you could have a positive sample at that point. So, so I think looking at it over time, you'll see. I don't really see an issue with nitrates.
In the 2020 report, it required specific notifications to residents with the 0.12 to 0.8 level, and now we're at 0.3. And the other measurement that was reported as a violation in 2020 was at 0.01 and is now up to 0.3. So I know that that's not, right up against the 1.0, but it is a steady increase from last year. And it is higher than the City of Austin number. And that one particularly caught my attention because we had some blood tests done in our family and some urine organic acids tests, and my daughter showed up with 800 times the safe limit of the chemical Roundup in her system, and had to go through a detoxification.
Yes, I don't know. The city's sample. Where are you seeing that? Just on their website?
Yeah, I just pulled theirs, which is theirs is 0.0. Sorry, they're 0.10. They're 0.10 and we're 0.3.
And that in that specifically nitrate. It's not just nitrate. It's there's a couple of different constituents that can be.
So the city just shows nitrate as nitrogen, and they're
Right, so that for y'all the average is 0.08. So you're under the city in that scenario.
okay. So that's it was hard to understand because we have 3 different nitrate measurements.
Yeah, and it's just how they sample. I realize it's confusing. The nitrate is really the one that we monitor, that we watch for. That's the concern, in that definitely starts getting into the single digits and growing, and then you get close to that 10.0 ppm, then TCQ may have a problem. And where they would see that is they don't normally analyze these. They would see that on an inspection when they ask our regulatory specialists, hey, give me your NAP plan, show me your NAP plan. We would show them all the recordings that we're getting by quarter, and then they would say, well, last year you're at 0.08 and now you're at 5.0. What are you doing about that? You obviously have a problem. Are you flushing enough? What are your chlorine levels? What is the incoming like from the city? And that's why we take 3 samples throughout the system so that we can hopefully identify the issue. If it's really high coming in, then we know we have a problem with the city, but it's usually at the end of the system where you have dead ends. Those are not flushed often enough to turn the water over, or you have a scenario like Rollingwood has previously had where it's not circulating well. You have different pressure planes, meters are not providing adequate flow coming in. You're going to start seeing those nitrate levels increase because the chlorine is getting eaten up because the water's not turning over, and then you start seeing, the biofilm grow. And in rural water systems, which is majority of Texas, it's very common to see single-digit nitrates. And every year you get an email or letter from the Water Supply Corp saying, hey, we're going to do a burnout. And they essentially switch to free chlorine and shock it and just put a ton of chlorine in there and burn it all out. And it's very common in rural systems where you have, 2, 3, 4-inch lines going all over the county roads. They just can't turn that water over, and you start seeing these things build up. But 0.08 is a pretty normal number. I wouldn't have any really cause of concern with that.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is about the turbidity. Because our single highest measurement was 0.23, with the limit at 0.3, and the city of Austin average was 0.04. So you were talking about, with some of these organic contaminants and with the lead and with, depending on the chlorine, that can affect the turbidity, and that was my last question, because ours seems to be reasonably higher and not as distant.
So one more, what is that constituent? Sorry, you were breaking up at the beginning.
All we have on our report is that
Right.
we don't have a high, low, and average like we do for some of the other individual items on the report. We just have highest single measurement is 0.23, with the turbidity limit being 0.3, and
Yeah.
the average of Austin was 0.04.
Yep.
So I don't know what our average was, but if you compare the number that we have on our report, we're 500% above Austin.
Yeah. So I should probably have clarified. So we don't record turbidity as your water system. That is a producer type deal. So someone who is producing the water, treating the water, they will record turbidity, and they're required to report that. So we should have probably put COA underneath that item. That's actually given to us from the city, and we are recorded in that. So we don't, like, I'm looking on your drinking water site right now, there's no turbidity at all on your system. So that's a City of Austin level, and I wonder, I don't know when they took it, where they took it. Could have been at Ulrich, which would feed y'all. It could have been at Water Treatment 4, which feeds other people, where they would have recorded that. But yeah, that's a City of Austin level.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, because it is, as you go back and forth, some of these things are
Yeah.
very difficult to understand, and as we have the luxury of being our own city, then we have the capacity, and I would say probably the responsibility, to ask the questions of how we wish to measure ours versus what City of Austin gives us.
Yeah, and I think, so kind of thinking out loud here, and I'll explore this. I don't think there's any reason we can't, like, color code these or something and have some key at the beginning that says the City of Rollingwood measures this and the City of Austin measures this for us, and they report it to us, and it's like in red or something. Maybe not red is scary, some other color, or some indication, or just an explanation of what COA is, and then we can list all of that, have it organized in the same way, but someone can easily read it and say, oh, okay, the city recorded that level, not the city. And we can always add explanation. We can't minimize, we can't take away anything on this report, but we probably could better clarify these are things that the city gives us, and we don't really, their entire water system recorded these levels, and these are things that we took, which you probably want to pay more attention to. Asbestos, for example. Asbestos is something that we measure. you have asbestos in your system. Most systems do. But that's a constituent that we are required to measure. So I don't know if that would be helpful or if that would add more questions, but we can look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, as we are, I think it just goes full circle back to where we started, which is that we are looking at, our water system in its entirety, and we now have the benefit of having y'all to support us rather than doing everything in-house. But that means we may also wish to be increasing and diversifying some of our own sampling rather than, in some cases, just taking the numbers from the city of Austin, because that's not necessarily reflective of our own system in all cases.
Mm-hmm. So that's something too, yeah. We do have some utilities that, like, there are cities like y'all or water supply corps that like to sample the secondary numbers specifically because it's helpful for residents, like total hardness of CaCO3. That's important if you have a water softener. You really need that number so that you can adjust your water softener. So you have, the perfect water for your system or for your liking. So they'll do additional samples of that. Chloride, calcium are common ones. And they'll do those even though they're not required to, and then just provide them to the residents on this report. So yeah, you're not constrained. This is sort of the state required list, but there are ways we could sort of on a schedule have a lab come grab certain parameters and then report those to us to add to this.
I, for one, would love to explore that.
Sam?
Yeah, this is Sam Attell. I'm curious about whether our sample within the city is statistically correct and accurate in the kind of information it's giving us. I mean, am I understanding that we typically have 10 sources at any one time reporting to us?
Well, I mean, they're one PWS, Public Water System ID, the city. So, although they have multiple sources, which is the main one is from Lake Travis, Lake Austin, but yes, when they take a sample under their PWS number, it could be somewhere else in their city, and it's not representative of Rollingwood. They are required under the state law to report that to us, and then we are required to put that on there, and they're not required to say, oh, don't worry about it. This was for y'all. This was like way over here, and by the F1 track. Y'all don't need to worry about that. Like they can't legally do that. So, it's not great, but it's not always the most accurate, way to sample.
I guess behind my question is kind of a statement, but it seems like to me what we're really concerned about here is the quality of the water that we're delivering throughout the city of Rollingwood to all the people who live in this area. And it seems to me, I don't know what the cost is of enlarging the sample and saying, this is an older part of Rollingwood, we want to sample here. This is a newer part and we want to sample here, and so forth. But it seems like we need a larger sample within the city if we're going to actually be telling people that the water you're drinking has certain characteristics and not others. And it would be terrible for us to wake up one day as a committee and to find out that the sample we've been getting isn't thorough and we're really not getting a good, accurate picture of the water that's being delivered within the city of Rollingwood. So I would like to know, if we did more sampling in the city, what would this cost us and how often should it be done?
Yeah, we can talk to some labs and look at that and provide something to you. It's not common for a purchased water system to do that. I'm not saying that some cities and MUDs and others will do that for specific parameters, where over the years, people complained about maybe their concerns with TTHMs or DBPs, which are the scary stuff. Disinfection by products is something we regularly sample for. We do in your system, and that's indicators or those are the cancer-causing sort of contaminants, right, that are the byproduct of chloramines in the system. So your levels are, 10, the limit is 60. So you're way, way on the low end of that. But those are parameters that we regularly sample. Chlorine is another one. You need chlorine in your system. It's a good thing. But we could get some costs and get kind of, I wouldn't recommend it more than annually. I don't, just based on your history, I don't think you're going to find anything different by sampling more frequently than that, because again, this is a pretty clean report. But we can get that.
My concern is not that we do it every month or every year, but my concern is at least somewhere along here, we take a much larger sample of the water that's being delivered within the city of Rollingwood to our residents in the various sections and make a determination that, well, this looks pretty good. Maybe 3 or 4 years from now, we'll do this again. But I think at least, I think at least it would behoove us in doing our due diligence to take a look at some larger samples one time around if the cost isn't outrageous.
That's the point I was trying to make as well, because there's a difference between, what's in the water that comes into us and what's in the water that goes through us.
Exactly.
And we know that we have an issue with some of our pipes, and so what I can't ascertain from our report is the quality of parts of our current system impacting the quality of the water significantly, because the majority of our measurements are from the water before it goes through our system.
Well, I can tell you, that is hard to read if you're just reading this. We look at these all the time, and I can tell you, and maybe that's needed, is right, a cover page, maybe some kind of report card that just simplifies, the main things that we analyze and how we grade the quality of the water. Disinfection byproducts is a huge one. It's a huge one to tell if your water's dirty or not, if there's problems. We do have utilities that have exceeded the MCL of 80 in total trialmethane. That's not good. TCQ fines you, you get in trouble for that. But these other inorganic contaminants are so minuscule, parts per billion, that it would be hard pressed to really find any water system without it in there. And so I think we could put probably an overall sort of summary that would help grade the water quality, right? Going back to your question, so chloramines, nitrates, disinfection byproducts, the unregulated contaminants, the chloroform, bromoform, dichloride, I always stumble on that one. Those 4 unregulated contaminants on the 3rd page, those make up the TTHMs and HAA5s, and so you're well below those maximum contaminant levels. And again, those are indicators. Those are high, those are exceeding MCL. Your water's dirty, you have other issues. Water age is a problem, for example. So, when you don't have these violations.
Andrew, I think the issue that we have here is that we want to treat Rollingwood kind of not like how Austin treats Austin, where you say, well, you can have water from this plant over here, water from that plant, but you see one number and you don't know where it comes from. Well, we have that same issue here in Austin, where we have 600 homes and 10 being sampled, and we're given a report that says your number is 0.1. But we don't know where that 0.1 comes from as an average, And if there are areas of Rollingwood where the water pipes are older and there are areas where it's younger, we want to say, hey, we took 5 samples over here. These were what the numbers look like. We took 5 samples over here. These are what the numbers look like. And we took 10 samples over here. And this is what the numbers look like. And so we can look, yes, in a holistic level at what the overall water is on average. But if we are looking at our water system, it would be helpful to understand if there are areas within the city that have higher levels than others, and then be able to understand that could be related to the water system itself in that area of the city, potentially corroding faster or deteriorating faster than other areas. Is it possible to expand the sample size and have a heat map of Rollingwood to understand where different chemicals or byproducts are being are prevalent? Does anyone do that? I mean, I think that's what we're thinking about. I just don't know if that is a realistic, effort. I think that's what we're thinking about.
Yeah,
The other
they
thing,
they do that, but they do that for specific issues, and they would do that, for example, for chlorine issues, or haliocytic acid issues, or I'll give you an example, green shores. Back to green shores. Kind of dirty water over there. Be careful. But they had a TTHM issue, which is that page 3 bottom there. Y'all are at 33 average, MCL's 80. They were 90. They were 120, 150, and that was throughout. So we had to go in, take samples from different areas of the neighborhood. There's certain constituents on here that would help, but fluoride is going to be an issue throughout your whole system. Cyanide, whole system. Some of these other asbestos, whole system. So you're not going to see anything. You'll spend a lot of money sampling at different points, and it's still, your MCL 7, your 0.19. I don't know what that's going to tell us if the other side of the neighborhood is 0.23, for example.
well, I think what it does.
So I think.
I think what it does is it establishes some priorities for the city, if nothing else. I mean, if we have a problem in a particular section of the city, then that area ought to receive a priority in terms of reworking their systems, as opposed to another area that doesn't have any problems or has very few problems.
I think we're getting confused in that, what we're trying to get to is we know that we have certain parts of the city where the system is less robust. And is there a way to measure if that is having an impact on water quality? Because we're about to go through a really expensive exercise of fixing some of our water system, and this would either help to solidify what our baseline is telling us where we need to prioritize, or it would perhaps alter that plan in some way, and especially for things like lead and copper, having one overall number when, for instance, the city of Austin had one site that was 15, but their overall number was 0.1. We may have the same thing here, and if that would then impact what we do about some of the major renovation that we have planning.
And maybe to clarify.
Yeah, and the only issue with lead and copper is, again, it's sampled in the home, whereas all these other samples are sampled in your water system. So the concern about lead and copper is they have to be an approved site, the way the TCQ sees it. So no treatment, no water softeners, nothing that will alter the chemistry of the water system inside the home for us to sort of take a sample and have assurance that it's comparable, right? And that's been our issue with that program, is not everybody knows what's going on in their home. And, that thing in the garage, well, I don't know what that did. Well, if you have one, it could strip copper out of the water system. And for the city, that's not your system, right? You didn't put that in, they did. So it doesn't represent the system as a whole. Now, we can widen that and get better sites and new sites as long as we can confirm, they're taking water directly from the system. There's nothing altering it. that can help. But I'll be honest, like your levels are just low. They're great. And I don't see an issue. I mean, really, TTHMs maybe over time is going to be an issue, but we're going to see that. We sample that every quarter. We're going to see that happen over time. And your pipes are largely PVC. So you don't have issues with, some cities have asbestos pipes. They see that asbestos number go up over the years, but we don't see that here. So we can definitely sample these constituents. I can get you some pricing because they will individually have to sample these. The lab will, and there'll be, a number for each sample. And I think it would be smart for us to sort of choose the sites that, or the constituents that y'all are most concerned about.
Am I understanding it correctly, though, that if we actually had an area that was having an issue, you'd see it in the overall test of the water system? So
we would
indicate a problem somewhere, and then we'd have to do further testing to find out where. But given where our numbers are, it's unlikely that there's any pockets of areas that are having significant issues. Is that how we should be understanding this?
Yeah, like I'm looking at your last 2 years of TTHMs, 0.3, 0.28, 0.29, 0.32, 0.34. I mean, very consistent over 2 years. And so we do sample every quarter TTHMs and halioacidic acids, which are the disinfection by. That's things people need to be concerned about, right? Unless you live in West Texas and you have radium in the water. Levels that exceed that 80 or 60 MCO over time can cause cancer over a long time, like 20, 30 years. But we see those numbers increase. We notice that, and because we're recording it in that NAP plan, and we can start taking mitigation efforts like more flushing, doing more detailed, analysis on chlorine. Where are we losing chlorine? Is the water stagnant somewhere? Is it not turning over? Where you see that mainly is dead end mains, right, that aren't flushed, or there's not enough water being consumed, like in the winter, for example, and chlorine drops out. You start seeing some of those byproducts increase. But yeah, those are quarterly samples that we take that we would notice that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you walking us through this as, people that are by no means experts on this topic. I found much of what you had to say very reassuring. I also appreciate the sort of willingness to ponder or debate whether we should be expanding our samples in the fall when we do some of that every 3-year testing. So I appreciate your time this evening. I felt like that was a really worthwhile discussion.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just mention it's something maybe I want to look at. It's not really a service that we provide, but y'all may want to consider applying for the Superior Water System title, because I think you qualify. So your last issue, I would say, was 2009. It looks like you had a positive coliform sample. Coliform is, generally speaking, just dirty water. When it's E. coli, though, that's scary stuff. But that's pretty good. And from 2009 to current, that y'all have had no violations in your water system at all. It looks like you had a lead and copper rule issue, which is probably just somebody forgot to sample. But CCQ has like a little application you can apply, and they approve that, and then you can put those signs up and kind of publicize, because they have a standard, the highest standard in the state is to be a superior water system. So you may qualify, and maybe good to share that with your residents. That generally, if you don't want to dive in the weeds, this is safe water. It's good water. So
Very much appreciated your time this evening, Andrew. Thank you for that. Any
Yeah.
other questions before we let Andrew go? All right. Well, thank you again. You're free to go. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good night.
Take care. All right. That was informative. Moving on to the next regular agenda item, which is an update regarding the water system capital improvement plan that was approved in May of this year.
Sure. Just realized we probably didn't ever close the loop on that. I know y'all had known that we were going through the process of doing the research and the study to get our capital improvements plan. It has now been finalized and completed, approved by City Council in May. There are still some chances for some updates to be made as additional information is found out in the water system. So we have pretty good maps now. We've done quite a bit of work in the last couple of years to update our maps, get all of our valves and lines, and understand where everything is, what's commissioned, what's decommissioned, and what we need to do. But there is still a chance for some of it to change. So there's a link to that in your packet. It's on the website. Basically, it lines out the different projects that they've identified. It gives them a high priority or a low priority. Low priority doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't be completed. It's just another factor that goes into how they decide. Maybe there's a certain area that there's a high concentration of something, and we could get the best deal if we fix, do X amount of projects. And so they're listed out just kind of basically those two priorities, and they talk about in the appendices, you can look at each project, what it would be proposed to do, and some potential costs involved. So obviously those are estimates, those might change, but at this time, the City Council has looked at it and is currently in the process of discussing funding for those projects. So there's a few other projects. We have the IIP, the CIP here, and some other, the spatial needs assessment for facilities. And so those are the kind of things they're discussing right now at the council meetings. And Phil, if you wanted to give any further detail on kind of where the council's at on this project, I'd be happy to let you do that.
It's Phil McDuffie, yeah. So what I would say, mostly based on our capital improvement project plan, is there are several things. There are the possibility of several different funding. However, the most likely possibility is going to be through some form of a bond election in November. And when you look through the plan, the total estimate right now is right at 5.3 million. There are the possibilities of some degree of economies of scale. We could attack some of these things piecemeal, but if you kind of get out here and get the crews out and kind of attack more of it, then there might be some savings that result in those economies of scale. Also, when you look at the history of the city, a lot of our water infrastructure has kind of been dealt with piecemeal, and this has been, because of budgetary constraints and stuff like that, things have been kind of, all right, what's the most immediate need that we have to deal with? And really, we've gotten to the point where doing a comprehensive fix might be absolutely the most prudent thing to do. I don't think I have to tell anybody in Rollingwood. Believe me, we hear a lot about people being disgusted with the boil water notices and all those, but quite frankly, when you look at the safety of the city, those things are inconveniences. Some of the things that more concern me when you look at our water system are the possibilities of us having inadequate flows to deal with fighting fires adequately at certain sections of our city and that type of thing. And the comprehensive plan that's been put forward with this will address a lot of those issues. So far, we've been lucky, but we don't want to find out that we don't have adequate water flow or we don't have the hydrants where they need to be, when somebody, when a house or a series of houses are being put in peril. And also, we need to understand that we all know that a lot of larger houses are being built, and those are required to have the sprinkler systems. That's putting extra demands on our water infrastructure as well. So, looking through the plan, it's well thought out. It's very comprehensive. I would invite everybody to look into it. Also, I'd invite you guys as kind of our ambassadors to talk to your neighbors, get them to look. Specifically, you can see it's broken out in different sections. You can look at how will this affect my section, that type of thing, because ultimately it's going to be up to the taxpayers of Rollingwood to vote through perhaps some bond issues or bond elections in order to finance some of this. Certainly, every financing is going to be looked at, but that's, as I say, our most likely course of actually getting some of these things done. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
That 5.3 million?
5.3, yeah.
Yeah. Is that designed to take care of the priorities for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? And does that period of time cover all the necessities that need to be done to the water system, or a percentage of them?
If you look at my understanding of it, looking at it, it is meant to kind of bring us up to scale and probably address our needs. Obviously, there's always going to be maintenance, stuff like that, but I would say more for 20 years. It's gonna kind of fix us where we should have been, where we should be for quite a while, and probably for 20 years. Of course, there's always going to be maintenance, stuff like that, but as with anything, I mean, we've really got a variety of aged infrastructure, some of which we've discovered there've been issues of, for instance, some PVC pipe being too thin of a grade. That's been exacerbated by the fact that it wasn't sunk low enough and didn't have enough sand placed in the channels when it was installed. That's been, and we've had pressure relief valves that have been basically not working at all, so we've had high pressure systems blowing stuff out. All of this has been contributing to some of these broken water lines, water breaks, and stuff like that. They've looked at it comprehensively. Right now we have two main, we have an upper and lower water zone. What they're proposing is putting in a third that would mainly, from my understanding of it, and once again, I'm not a water system specialist, but just reading through the report, it's going to deal with Rollingwood Center area, so a lot of the big commercial area that we have down at that portion. But yeah.
That number just seems small to me. I mean,
Well,
5 million is not a little money, but it's not a huge amount of money.
Well, our city budget is typically around a couple mil is what we've got, a little over that. So 5 mil is, for us, historically, it's a chunk. And as we all know too, with maybe runaway inflation and, hopefully we don't know what's going on, that's the best estimate, and they're very clear in the report that, these are estimates, and we probably are going to, even on some of the high priority things, I imagine, should the bonds come through, there will be some degree of prioritization and attacking the things that are most urgent first and kind of running with it. But, hopefully we can get most of it done.
That's my question.
Yeah.
There's projects A through T that are listed on here. Is that in order of priority?
No, I don't
Because
think so.
the
either.
first X numbers say high priority next to them, and they're the ones that start at A.
Right.
And then from,
What page are you on?
I'm on page, I don't know, it's 6.3, so page 18. And then starting with, letter O, it goes down to a lower priority.
Okay, yeah. I see
So
what
the
you're
first,
looking at.
the higher priorities is sort of
Right,
4 million and change of the 5 million.
right.
And I just wondered if they were in order of priority as they were listed there.
Not, my understanding is they aren't. They aren't, like, we aren't gonna go down the alphabet.
Well, I just didn't know how we would,
Yeah.
if there was a methodology towards if we could only do X, what would it be?
I don't think that's been determined at this time. I mean, obviously, as I said, I think that will be up to us to suss out at that time, but it will probably be based on how urgent, the, how big of a danger, how big of a problem do we have, that type of thing,
Well, my 2 cents is,
Yeah, sure.
it's only gonna get more expensive and more difficult to fix as time goes on,
Right.
so.
And that's,
And it
once
will- It
again.
will need to get fixed eventually.
Yeah. Well, once again, I mean, while we were campaigning for the city council, I did have occasion to look at what previous council members or potential council members had campaigned on, stuff like that. This is nothing new. Like, you look back 20 years and people are saying, well, we got to fix our water infrastructure, by gosh, And to those people's credit and all the people who have come before, I think they absolutely did their best given the budgetary constraints that we have as a city, and things got addressed as best they could. And quite frankly, we all have, according to all the reports, pretty safe water and stuff like that. We do have some inconveniences, and as the construction has increased and we've had some big trucks and some things over, some of that has been more and more exposed. But also, part of it is just the function of aging infrastructure, as with anything that's aging, the older it gets, the more things show up.
Some of us can't turn on a hose and still get water in our house.
Right, yeah, so.
If I turn on the hose, I'm done. No tap water.
Right. So, as we're at a stage, and, we campaigned on it too, that this was something that we want to deal with, and, so this is the action item that's been put forward. So, as I
So how
said.
can we help?
Well, talk to your neighbors. I don't know. Perhaps it would be incumbent on the utility commission, like maybe you guys could actually put together some kind of an educational project. We will have some neighborhood nights out, things of that nature. Maybe we could have a booth. I don't know. Let's spitball ideas of how do we actually get buy-in from the citizenry of Rollingwood. But I would think that the utility commission would be one of the main groups to try to educate, have people really understand. Once again, I think Kay Freeze did a fantastic report, and people can look specifically at their area and kind of go, oh, what are we looking at? What are the issues that Kay Freeze has identified in our backyard?
I think we will need some direction on that, and I think we may have a role to play in that as an unbiased commission to help, because I saw other things in like the strike force report, where the strike force said that the priority was to over all of their water problems, and that's what consumers in Rollingwood had told them, and I was like, I wasn't aware that that was and I don't know if that's playing a role in city council. It seems like there are, again, sometimes the squeaky wheels get.
Well, there are
It's not
absolutely
necessarily-
multiple issues that the city are dealing with,
Yeah.
you know, and our flooding issues are a major issue. Also, our water infrastructure, I would say, you know, if I had to say the two biggest issues that we're dealing with right now, well, there's a lot. I can't even say those two, because also there are concerns over height restrictions on buildings, of overbuilding, of the, you know, people building over setbacks. You know, so there's a variety of issues, but certainly our flooding issues are front and center. I think our water infrastructure is also front and center. And I don't think it's a matter of we do this and then we won't do that. I think, and I, you know, what the strike force came up with was what they came up with. And those two, understanding the report that came out from the strike force, those were recommendations, those are, and, you know, whether or not that is a comprehensive, accurate opinion of the city of Rollingwood or not, you know, it was created by human beings. I mean, so.
No, I just mean it would be, since there are, you know, various vocal,
Sure.
self-interested and
Sure.
other, wasn't putting that
Well,
in the right words.
I think in order for us to put our support
It'd be
behind this
helpful.
thing, we need to see what the final package is gonna look like. And so we would appreciate you coming back and reviewing that with us after that has occurred with the council.
Well, for the most part, the
It's
final
it's in there.
package, huh?
It's there.
Yeah, right, for the most
No,
part.
but I mean, I thought you were saying parts of that are still flowing and
No, this is
this is it.
the plan. Now, how the plan actually gets implemented, you know, it's the same as any other plan in that, you know, it may be modified as more things get discovered or stuff like that, but for the most part, K-Freeze and, you know,
So we just need to familiarize ourselves with this
Yeah.
plan.
for sure, yeah, and it's very detailed. I would, you know, invite everybody to pour through it, look through it. I've still got more pouring and looking through to do. But I mean, I've gone through it a couple of times, and every time I get more and more ingrained with it. But this is the comprehensive plan, you know.
Is the next step for the city council to come up with a funding strategy and then put that vote out to the community? Is that what literally next step is? Is that what we would be expecting, or is there more
That's what we're
discussion?
expecting, is that this likely, I mean, we're actually gonna be having we're fixing our budget right now. So we're having our budget meetings. Those things are gonna be discussed, in front of the public, as with everything. During those budget meetings, my understanding of it right now is the likelihood of getting this dealt with in a comprehensive fashion, the way it's laid out in this report, is going to result in the need for a bond election. It's gonna be before the voters to say, yes, we are willing to, you know, pay X amount per $1 million valuation additional taxes in order to provide the monies to fix our water infrastructure. That's what it's gonna take.
And I think as
Good.
far as the next step for the steps for the commission, I think city council, once there's a funding source identified, that's when I think the utility commission would be enlisted to say, you know, hey, here's the money we're looking at, here's what we need to do, and I think there's gonna be a lot of public input. I think there's gonna be a lot of public discussion around, you know, obviously we have a lot of projects, we can't pay for all of it, what's important to us, and I think that's gonna be a community conversation that picks up after this. So yes, the report is complete. We do need to identify funding for some of the projects or all the projects, however that works. There's also an opportunity for some overlap with the drainage, so it doesn't make sense to tear up the street once to do a drainage project and then come back and tear it up again to do a water project, so there may be some room for overlapping and things like that. So I think that's gonna be a big community discussion, and I think that's where the utility commission would come in as a, you know, assisting in that kind of mission to get those identified, those priorities, so. But until then, definitely a great document to read, and tune in to city council if you're kind of interested in where their, what their discussions are on funding, so.
There was one thing that was in the report that mentioned that the city of Austin can give us 12 months notice to tell us we gotta go get our own raw water.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought about how to proceed negotiating with the LCRA on that?
I think that's definitely a discussion that's, that is kind of brought to the forefront right now, but, you know, all kind of things. I think most people are leaning towards that probably wouldn't happen in the next year or two, but it doesn't mean we don't need to get ahead of it. And so I absolutely think that's a great discussion to start having, and hopefully we can be bringing those kind of discussions back in the next year before everyone jumps in, right? So.
Yeah.
Rain catchers.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
also, I mean, just to put out a public service announcement based on that, yeah, that's something that probably a lot of our citizenry are not aware of. And that gets triggered if we use 75% of our monthly. So all that to say that to the extent that we can hopefully get our friends and neighbors to understand that conservation is likely going to save all of us a lot of pain and trouble, both in our wallets and in our emergency situation, you know.
So what are we doing in that regard? Because I
Well-
see it all the time. I mean, I'm walking around the neighborhood. There's
Right.
people that are watering 3 or 4 times a week.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I would say this is something that needs to be looked at. First, there are restrictions and enforcement that we haven't, you know, that hasn't been occurring a whole lot. I think also we might look at restructuring our billing in order to make it more onerous on those, because when we look at usage, there definitely is a wide disparity throughout the community, and if we can kind of incentivize maybe our most egregious water users to start considering it, and one way to do that might be by you know, looking at restructuring our billing to make it more onerous to use those high quantities of water.
Yep.
There's always the
time for us to do
opportunity
that
to have
again
some
anyway, right?
financial incentive.
So
I think messaging also is probably important. I think a lot of people may not be aware that we do follow what City of Austin follows, and they might think, well, we're not in City of Austin. So that's something we can do on our part. I know we put that in the bill this month, the utility bill that came out. We said, you know, FYI, we're in stage 1. Here's where you can find out more information, but we definitely have the ability to blast that more in the community, just for education purposes.
Yep.
So.
Sometimes just a little, we have 10 policemen, sometimes just a little door knock on a,
yeah. So,
on a
hey.
Tuesday when
For
we're supposed
sure.
to be watering.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
people
get a door-
generally don't.
You get a door knock twice, sometimes you will stop that behavior more than if you can afford to pay a lot more for your water.
Sure. Yeah. Often people just don't know, and there are some other cases where there are folks on wells or something, and we cross those bridges when we get to there. But definitely something we can be a little better about proactively enforcing. So.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Any other questions for either Phil or Ashley? No? I don't see Clark either. So we will move on. before I adjourn the meeting, I just wanted to point out that I was provided with some materials relative to or related to the cellular cell tower and cellular service discussion that we've had in the past. Elizabeth provided me some maps and some things that show us some of the coverage from some of the carriers. So I would ask that these be provided to Ashley. We're going to add this again to the agenda for next month, and then we can have maybe more of a discussion around potential action and ways that we might want to try to address this, try to get more information on it, understand if, according to this, AT&T's got this place covered like no other, but I don't know if that's true or not. So we'll have some discussion on that. So let's please add that to the agenda for next time. And if there are no other comments, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.